wanted to tell everybody, loved your papers on that picture. Some of you were the animals. Some of you were in the stands. Had a numerous number of people in the stands becoming disenchanted with the whole idea of this persecution, Roman people in the stands, and sort of appalled by it and wanting to maybe check out Christianity a little bit more, which I think is a legitimate storyline that could have happened. Yeah, Alex. You know what? When you are home, the moment it gets in your head, stick it in the pocket in your notebook or stick it in your bag. Oh. Okay, okay. Oh, that's right, because you were gone. Do you guys, okay, I'm a little bit afraid here that do you guys know about that they're going to have like a Skole evening? Never mind. A Skole what? I didn't say anything. Oh, you know about it? Okay. Okay. So there's going to be like a get together in the evening and people are going to read. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Like, why did you tell them? So I don't know. I was planning on being there, and then they were going to have some of you share your papers because your ones on the picture are pretty short, and they were going to display the picture. But one of the dates that they're thinking of doing it, I have one of my college classes that night, so I might not be able to be there. But anyway, I will work with Mrs. Ladson and some of you can share those. But the point of that whole thing was it would be difficult to choose who's to share, honestly, because I was very moved. I was very moved by what you guys I had to say. And I know Mrs. Ladson was the week that I was sick, and you guys shared. She said she really enjoyed it, and thank you all that day for being willing to share. Sometimes it's hard to put yourself out there, outside your comfort zone, and read what you've written. And honest, I did not read a paper that wasn't worthy of being read to your fellow students. I mean it. And so, we don't want to be so puffed up with ourselves that we think we're the greatest, but we also need to recognize that when you've done something well, you can put yourself out there. You can share it, and it's okay. And I realize for some of you, that's nothing. That's just the kind of person you are. And for some people, I know that when you are willing to do that, it's big for you. And you've conquered something inside yourself to make yourself go out there and do that. And I honor that when you guys do that. And so don't think I don't notice when it's fine. Some of you are pretty quiet in class and you don't really answer the questions. I'm fine with that. That was me. I was afraid of being wrong when I was in school. I didn't want to answer unless I had to. But when you do, I notice, all right? And it's a little victory in you. I celebrate with you. You know what I mean? When you put yourself out there and you're just willing to say it, even though maybe you're not sure that's what I'm looking for, but I'm just going to put myself out there and try it. And it's good for you whenever you do that. But I also want to tell you that the ones of you that don't care to do that, it's okay. And I know how you feel. Yeah, Alex.
I thought that assignment was pretty fun. These assignments are pretty fun.
Are you locked out? Oh, sure. 11:45. Okay.
And if there are any students in your levels that are not part of this classroom, can you please grab them and bring them as well?
You mean like the junior high? Oh, I know what you meant. Other rhetoric level. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. That's fine. Okay. So Hannah said that she did this reading some time ago because we had 2 weeks off. And it's probably a little fuzzy for you, honestly. Not to mention that, I don't know, at least half of book 10 was that enormous ode to Constantine by Eusebius, where he just piled it on so thick. We are not going to deeply discuss this. And if you just remember, Eusebius wrote a super praise of Constantine. That's enough to remember. But before we dig in, actually, we're going to spend about half, maybe only half of our time on Eusebius, because I need to do a little storytelling today. I need to tell you, just put away the books, story time, to tell you what happened after and get you ready for the next book that we're going to read, okay? But before I do that, I have a couple of pictures. So there is a town. It's on the Euphrates River. So suppose today it's in Iran, Iraq, Iran. Iran, Iraq. It's kind of, they're there, you know, that general, I think it's Iran. Called Dura Europos. And in the 1930s, excavators, archaeologists went into Dura Europos and they started excavating it. Turns out that Dura Europos had been besieged and attacked by a group of people from the east, the Sasanians. They were like the heirs of the Parthians that were always attacking Rome. And, and it besieged this town, and interestingly, used the first chemical warfare known to history. I know. So they were tunneling under the city of Dura Europos, the Sasanians. And the Romans in Dura Europos knew, because there was a Roman garrison there. They knew they were tunneling. So, of course, what do? You tunnel down and try to nab them. Do you know what I mean? That's what you do. But the Sasanians put sulfur and pitch in the tunnel, and then the minute they knew the Romans broke through, they torched it, and it produces sulfur dioxide, which killed 20 of the soldiers who were right there on the scene. Yes. Anyway, so for whatever reason, they abandoned the city. The city was conquered. I don't know. Well, it didn't totally burn. The city was abandoned, and no one moved back in. And then, of course, it's a deserty sort of area, and it just gets covered, and it gets buried, and it gets forgotten. Much like Pompeii got lavaed, there was no lava, got ashed, all right, ashes and pumice, and then enough time passes and people forget there was a city there. This happened to Dura Europos, but it was another case where the people just bugged out after they were conquered and they left everything. And it was just left like that. So they could just see, oh my gosh, they left everything the way it was in the year 254, roughly. Yes. I think this is what they call it now. I mean, it's named after nearby. Yeah, that's a really good question. See, that bothers me now. I thought it was named what they named it now. I don't know. Oh. The name. Or maybe they figured it out. Maybe that was an ancient name. But actually, and it's not a double name. One group of people was calling it Dura, and the other was calling it Europos. So they just call it Dura Europos. Sort of like Budapest. You know, Buda was on one side of the river and Pest is on the other. Yeah, there were two cities, Buda and Pest. Yeah. Because I'm reading it, and I'm like, where is Buda? Like, oh, it's near Pest? What? Budapest. It's a combo. It's like if St. Paul in Minneapolis, they called it St. Minneapolis or something like that. They just put it together. Okay. They excavated, among other things, a Jewish synagogue. And this synagogue is chock full of pictures. And this is a shocker because, you know, second commandment, no images. And so it had been the understanding of people for years, for centuries, that there were never any human representations decorating synagogues. In 254, in Dura Europos, there was. So this, I'm going to I'll pass it around. If you can promise to keep listening while you look, all right? Because it's kind of hard to see. This is not a doorway. When you look at it, because you see it has no, it's a little alcove. It's a little niche in the wall. and it's where they kept a copy of the Torah. The Pentateuch. They kept the law there. And then they decorated. These are all Old Testament scenes. And this one right next to it, there's a row of guys, and it is Samuel anointing David. And David's brothers are all there. Yes.
What changed in that Jewish community?
We don't know. This is the thing. And we don't have surviving other synagogues, Alex, so we don't know if anything changed. Maybe they always did it that way. And we had just a misapprehension of what they considered the rules of images were. So in the same town, Dura-Europos, they also found a Christian church. It used to be a house, and it had been converted. So walls had been knocked out to put in a baptistry and things, and they converted into a church. It also is decorated with pictures all over the walls, not as profusely as the synagogue. This is not in great shape, all right? But you'll see it when Jesus walking on the water, and he's calling Peter to come out of the boat to him, all right?
Wow.
So this is on the wall of Dura-Europos of the Christian church there. So we know for a fact that the early churches, and apparently some synagogues, were highly decorating the church building. And you guys, if you know some church history, you know that the church, after the Reformation, there was a phase where there were groups of people that just stripped churches bare. No decorative elements whatsoever. There are very few people whose churches are that way anymore. I imagine every one of you, somewhere in the church that you attend, there's a picture of something hanging on the wall. Like there's a picture of Jesus, or there's at least a cross, even if it's not a crucifix, in a Sunday school room or somewhere. We decorate. But for a while, that was really nix on all decorating of churches among the Puritans. But the early church did it. We know it because we found them. Do any of you ever go to the Greek? The Greek Orthodox churches have festivals where they sell Greek food. Do you know about this? In the summer? Assumption in East Moline has one. Anyway, if you ever go to one of those, I went to the one at Assumption in East Moline once, and I ate their baklava and everything. And then the priest was there, and he said, "Would you like to take a tour of the church? People can." And at Assumption, the whole front wall is painted. It's huge, like as big as that wall, but painted with scenes of the Ascension, and it's beautiful. Anyway, and I thought, wow, that reminds me of these bright pictures from the early church. Yes.
That's weird. Why do Catholic traditions keep the art and actually do art and stuff when they're the closest to they're one of the longest running Christian denominations and the closest to not making any images of God?
Mm-hmm. Because the early church did it from the beginning, and they have kept that tradition, as have the Orthodox. That we do images. Orthodox and Catholic do images are fine. Jesus is the image. The incarnation is the image, and so that's the idea. But it's sort of a proof of it. Do you know what I mean? If the ones who go back the farthest in time maintain that habit of decoration, and it really was. It wasn't even all the Protestants. Martin Luther was fine with decorations. Do you know what I mean? It was Calvin. It was the Reformed and then the Puritan strain, John Knox in Scotland and in England, that was more that. But that's a good question. Okay, so 254 was the fall of Dura-Europos. And that's about 70 years before what we're reading in the church history. It's pretty cool, isn't it? It doesn't look like great art, but I think it's better than I could do, honestly. Some of you have seen my lack of skills. Okay, let's remind ourselves of what Eusebius had to say and finally finish this book, which we've been reading for 3 months. It hasn't been quite that long. Let's go back and remind you of what's happened. Remember, we have 2 rulers in the east and 2 rulers in the west. It is really not important that you keep track with a scorecard of who's where and what. It's not important. Just know that we have rival rulers, right? And and in book 9, it's mentioned, and I told you 2 weeks ago that Constantine's dad, Constantius Chlorus, was one of the rulers in the West. He was in Britain. And he was never as heavy a persecutor. He might have knocked down a few churches in Britain for appearance's sake, because that was the law. But there's no evidence that he really hounded Christians like Diocletian and Galerius did in the East. It was always worse in the East. And Constantius Chlorus died, and Constantine took over. And he went to Rome, which was suffering under a tyrant named Maxentius, and obliterated his army. This was after Constantine saw some sort of sign or vision in which he saw either a cross or the Chi-Rho symbol, the X with the thing that looks like a P, but actually makes a sound. The first 2 letters of Christ's name. And he said, in this sign you will conquer. The vision said this. So he painted that on his soldiers' shields and said, I'm going to follow the God of the Christians, and he won. So he started sending messages to Maximin in the East saying, stow the persecuting Christians. I'm following that God now. I don't want this to happen anymore. And book 9 opens with this. It says, Maximin was not pleased with what was written. And so he stuffed the above edict in a corner. Whenever they have these edicts that say, we are going to round up all the Christians and persecute them, they put it in public places, right? Nail it to the wall. And this one, he doesn't like it, so I'm just going to file this away in the back drawer of my filing cabinet and pretend it didn't happen. That's how Maximin responded, yes. Oh, I am on page 321. I'm at the very beginning of book 9. All right, because yours is just like mine, isn't it? Okay, so we're in sync. All right, so page 322. Despite the fact that he stuffed the edict in a corner, word got out and persecution lifted. And Eusebius says, when this had been done, it was as if a light had suddenly blazed out of a dark night. In every city, churches were thronged, congregations crowded, and rites duly performed. All the unbelieving heathen were astonished at the wonder of so great a transformation, and hailed the Christian's God as alone great and true. Just imagine. You guys are what? I don't want to insult you. 14, 15, 16, 17? You're in that range. This persecution since Diocletian had been going on for well over a decade. Imagine that since you were 4, 5, 6 years old, Christianity had been a capital offense. And maybe you as a child even saw it happening. Maybe you saw people with hooks in them dragged through the streets to death. And then an edict comes out and says, you know what? It's legal. Christianity, legal. No more persecution. Just imagine the joy, the stunned, almost unbelief. Oh my gosh, is this real? And they're thronged to the churches. But Maximin doesn't like it. Do you remember 2 weeks ago we talked about the soul of the world and how when Rome is good to the Christians, it does well, and when it's not, it does poorly. And individuals, have terrible, nasty deaths, the whole eaten by worms and I smell death that I don't even want to know many more details than that about. This is what happens to persecutors. Maximin, it says, he tolerated this situation for less than 6 months. I can't stand it. I got to get rid of these Christians. They're driving me crazy. So he ramps up the persecution again. And the first question I asked you about this book was, in what ways did Maximin try to promulgate the blasphemies contained in the memoirs of Pilate? In other words, how did he spread the ideas in these books? What did he do? He had a plan of attack. Make the little kids learn it. Because everybody at all ages knows if you want to turn society, get the kids and make them learn it. Yeah. It is. It says they forged the memoirs of Pilate. This is another one of these bogus gospels. If you've ever read, and I don't recommend it, maybe you've seen the movie, The Da Vinci Code. Maybe you know something about this. It's just a sideline heretical, it's trash. But it's based on things that were really written. There were a bunch of other writings that the church rejected, and there's a Gospel of Thomas, and they said, this is not legit. We can tell this is not apostolic, this is not legitimate. We don't, and it teaches things contrary to Scripture, to what we've already accepted as Scripture. So this is another one of these that's floating around. They forged the memoirs of Pilate and of our Savior, full of all sorts of blasphemy against Christ, and sent them with the approval of their superior all over his realm with edicts that they were to be posted everywhere, both town and country, and assigned to children by their teachers to study and memorize instead of lessons. Yeah. He's not stupid. He knows that if you can force the kids when they're young to memorize these and learn it, they will not forget. And they will grow up to be haters of Christians, or at least despisers of Christians, at minimum. So that was his plan. He sent out numerous letters in the East. Remember, he's in the East, saying things like this. I'm just going to read little bits of it. At last, the feeble boldness of the human mind has shaken off and scattered all the blinding fog of error. The error is Christianity. That until now had assaulted the senses of people more miserable than wicked and shrouded them in darkness of ignorance. I'm on page 325. And it now recognizes that the benevolent providence of the immortal gods governs and sustains it. All those crazy wackos have finally gotten the memo that it's Jupiter and Juno and all the rest of them that run the world. Who is so senseless? This is mid 326. Who is so senseless or stupid as not to grasp that only the benevolence of the gods prevents the earth from refusing the seeds committed to it and frustrating the hopes of the farmer? Or that impious war does not plant itself on the earth to drag grimy bodies off to death and pollute the healthy air of heaven? Or that the sea does not swell and storm under the blasts of wind? Who is so senseless and stupid not to know that Jupiter runs the world? And it's only by seeking his favor that we don't have floods and earthquakes and all these terrible things. This is Maximin.
It's a whole scale of indoctrination and brainwashing. And I'm just from a sociology standpoint, it's
But even to balance a little bit what you're saying, though, Ethan. Remember, I don't think any of you would call what your parents are doing indoctrination in teaching you, but we are told to raise up our children in the faith, right? And so, at the very least, we know, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And so what you teach children, even if it's not full-scale indoctrination, which does happen and it's terrible, anything children are exposed to by an authority that they trust, a parent or a teacher, they will assimilate and it becomes part of you. Like my hope for you guys is that I don't know that you'll remember all these guys' names and dates but that something will have changed inside you. We read these things together and something changes in you and that you take. You are changed because you encountered this, even though maybe 20 years from now you don't know what put that in you, but it's this. And of course you're old enough that you can consciously sort of see it happening in yourself. Little kids, kindergarten, second grade, whatever, they don't see it happening in themselves. So we're called to do that. And I don't know if we could call we call it indoctrination because we don't like what he's teaching. But what they're really just doing is saying, this is your school curriculum. Much like, I'm assuming you're all probably homeschooled for reasons, and probably know that there are a lot of things happening in schools today that are just abominations to feed that to little kids that just need something more wholesome, and they just need to learn to read and write, honestly, and not be thinking about these other things. And so I think we all can, that's a middle ground we can all meet at, that children learn and they learn from people they trust, and what you teach them will change them as human beings. Even if these poor kids grow up and they just have an aversion to Christians and they don't know why, and they don't remember any of the bits of the memoirs of Pilate that they were made to memorize, you know what I mean? But they know something and they don't like it. They don't like these Christians for some reason. Yeah.
Public schools, the problem with public schools is that they aren't teaching kids to think. They're doing the thinking for the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where indoctrination comes in.
This is true.
A kid anything, but as long as you teach that kid to think, he'll be able to figure out his own answers to equipping him for life.
But there's a stage before that, I think, Alex, where the kids you can't teach them to think yet because all you can do is share stories with them. Do you know what I mean? I'm talking about 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds. Do you know what I mean? And it's just so critical of what you share with them. It will change them for the rest of their lives. Anyway, okay, that's our philosophy of education for today. But it's a very clever thing Maximum did, to put it in the schools. Yes, please.
Indoctrination only used in a negative connotation, or could you, by definition, could you also use it in an indoctrinating principles of the Christian?
It should be neutral because it just means putting the doctrine into someone, whether the doctrine is true or false. But I can't ever think of it ever being used not negative.
Well, think of it this way. So, the end for indoctrinate means to enforce. Indoctrine is the method of putting it out. By definition, it could be used in a neutral way, but the way it's shifted as a word, it can't necessarily be used in a positive light. It's mostly all throughout the history of the word been used in a negative way.
And I think it's a fairly recent, because I read a lot of old books because it's mostly what I do, and I'm trying to think if I've ever seen that word in any older book. I'm like, no. So for all I know, when it was coined, it was intended to be negative. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. This is a really good question because technically, and that's what I'm trying to bring out is, a Christian parent reading the Bible to their child, someone who is heathen might say, you're indoctrinating that child to have to believe in Jesus or believe that the Bible is true. And I would have to say, yeah, I guess so. In a sense, kids are going to get, okay, in the more neutral sense, kids are going to get indoctrinated one direction or another. It's just the direction, they're going to learn something. Oh, they're hungry to learn. They will learn something. But it was a very clever move on his part to see that schools are the venue, the pathway to bring down the Christians. Yeah, Kyle. Well, you know what? It is in my house because if I have a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old and I say, sit down, we're reading this, and you don't, then they do as they get old. No, so that's the difference. So Ethan is painting a picture of something that I think we might call a cult, where you wouldn't have the power to leave it. I don't know very many Christian parents that would, you know, you would pray for your child immensely if they decided to become, I don't know, a Buddhist or I'm not dissing. Well, they're heathens. Okay, I am dissing them, but I don't know that we'd lock them up. So that is true. Yes, Alex.
Children are and how you said that they're really indoctrinated,
It's okay.
One way or another. But I guess you could say it's not a bad thing. It's the way you use it. I would say that if you are going to indoctrinate a child, at least try to indoctrinate them in the better, in like correct direction. So if you want them to go to heaven to believe in God, and you don't want to have to deal with it in the future because you didn't tell them about it, they're probably end up in like a satanic cult or something like that. It was better to tell them about God now and have them go to church as when they were younger. Whereas they're full-grown adults, they want to be with the world, but they do not care anything for God. But then you also have to take into account the adults that have never heard about God throughout their entire lives, but they still come to God as well.
Sure. And you know what? You just a second. You made me think of something. In general, when we think of indoctrinating someone, we do it to have power over them. So picture cults, where they bring people, they want power over them. We teach our children about the Lord because we want them to have truth. It's a completely different aim. It might be very similar methods. Honestly, my kids were sitting there memorizing Psalms and, when they were little, and we had the children's story Bible, every morning and everything. So it's similar methods, but my goal is not to have power over them. My goal is to show them the truth. That 2 + 2 is 4. It is. Learn it. Yes.
So the way you're using indoctrination, it all boils down to: do you want to have power over them, or do you want them to know the actual truth, or what it is?
Yes.
What do you want them to know? Because you don't want either your power over them, or you just want to give them the information. And for children, there's growing up and they have not known anything about the world, and they want to know as much information as they can. And so to teach them about God at a young age, you're giving them the real truth so that they're able to function better in the world.
Very good. That's very good. Very good. What are we going to share, Ethan?
The definition is indoctrination is the process of inculcating a person with ideas, attitudes, cognitive strategies, or professional methodologies. So basically instilling them with persistent correction, ideas, attitudes, cognitive strategies, or professional.
So that sounds relatively neutral to me. That's interesting that the definition is actually, but we almost universally kind of take it as being so the denotation, that denotation means like the dictionary, the definition is neutral, but the connotation, the way we take it, the way we perceive it is negative. Okay. Probably. I would have been fired a long time ago too. Okay. So back to, I would have many, many times over. Back to Eusebius. So Maximin goes on and on about how the pagan gods, the gods of Rome, are the ones who do protect from natural disaster. And then right after this, of course, we can see what's coming because of Eusebius's themes. On page 327, he says, God, the champion of his own church, gagging the pompous boasting of the tyrant, showed himself as our heavenly ally. And then I have highlighted the words famine, disease, war. All of these break out at the same time. The disease, the footnote says an ulcer that was a carbuncle called in Greek anthrax. Ooh, anthrax, a very deadly disease. And it says the fact that all these things occurred at the same time completely refuted the tyrant's impudent boasting against the deity. Your gods don't protect you from any of this. He's pouring it all out on you now. And he eventually, Maximin backs off, and but he loses face. He loses the respect of the people because, again, of the way the Christians act through all this. Bottom of page 328, the zeal and piety of Christians were obvious to all the heathen. In this awful adversity, they alone gave practical proof of their sympathy and humanity. All day long, some of them tended to the dying and to their burial, countless numbers with no one to care for them. Others gathered together from all parts of the city a multitude of those withered from famine and distributed bread to them all. Right? This wins the hearts of the world when we serve, when we do acts of kindness, acts of mercy. It shouts to the world. And then Eusebius closes this section with this on page 329. Because, see if you remember this. Do you remember why Eusebius thought under Diocletian persecution flared up again so bad? It's been a while. It's been a couple weeks. Because before that, everything was really good for the church, he said. And then suddenly persecution came again. He said that the church got slack and lazy. Do you remember that? It said they became arrogant and boastful, and the bishops started arguing with each other, and the priests, and there were factions, and God disciplined them. And he says this again here. Sometimes he scourged his people, and in due time corrected them through trials. But after enough chastening, he showed mercy and kindness to those who had hope in him. God disciplines, but it never lasts forever. It doesn't last forever. Maximin ends up dead. Maxentius at the Milvian Bridge ends up dead. And Constantine ends up on top with his compatriot Licinius. So the idea is we're going to have one in the east and one in the west. And we talked about this. Why did Constantine win the battle against Maxentius, according to Eusebius? He had God. I'll just read some of the things that I highlighted here in that section. I'm in the wrong book. Hang on. Okay. We have praying to God in heaven and his word, Jesus Christ, relying on God's help. God himself dragged the tyrant with chains, knowing that his help came from God. Right. He mentions it a lot of times. Eusebius directly connects Constantine's victory over all of this with God. Now, book 10, I already told you, half of it is a very, very long speech that Eusebius actually delivered in a church at the dedication of a church in praise of Constantine. And yeah, even the editor of the book said, this is a little tiresome. You might want to skip. Yeah. Oh, youthful pride of God's holy temple, honored with mature wisdom from God, yet famed for deeds of youthful virtue, on whom he comprehends all, has bestowed the unique privilege of building his house on earth and restoring it to Christ. May we never cease to offer the Father of our universe, thanks for him. And it goes on. Eusebius also wrote an entire life of Constantine. That is not quite that bad. It's got more actual events, but it's pretty bad. I'm going to read a little section out of it to you here in a minute. But most of the rest of book 10 is a series of decrees. imperial edicts, decrease and here, decrease and there. And the first one here grants an amazing right to everyone. This is my first question about Book 10. What right was granted by the imperial edict of Constantine and Licinius? This first one, what did he say? Yeah, go ahead, Anna. Yes, both of those. No more persecution and total freedom of worship. You want to worship Jupiter? Go for it. You want to worship Isis? Go for it. You want to worship Jesus? You go for it. And by the way, I, Constantine, agree with you, and I will be giving you extra perks. This is called the Edict of Milan, 313 AD. And they weren't actually in Milan, but whatever. It comes down to us as being the Edict of Milan. Empire-wide religious freedom. Overnight. It's amazing. It's amazing. He says he gives this right unrestrictedly. If any should appear to have bought their places of worship, they must return them to the same Christians without payment or any demand for compensation, and do so without negligence or hesitation. Did you confiscate their church? Give it back. And then I asked another question. What other things did you see he granted in other edicts, and what seems to concern him about the church? Did anyone find an answer for one of those, or both? He says in the next edict, churches should be restored immediately. He says, it has been our pleasure that certain specified ministers of the legal and most holy Catholic religion should receive some contribution for expenses. He's giving them money. I have sent a letter to Ursus, the finance officer of Africa, directing he pay 3,000 foles to your constancy, which is apparently 6,000 denarii. He gives them money. Where was the other one? I desire that those in your province in the Catholic Church, those whom they customarily call clergymen, should once and for all be kept entirely free from public duties, civic duties. Like for us, that would be jury duty and any jobs you have to do as a citizen. Christian clergy don't have to do that. Taxes, no, not for Christian clergy. It's amazing that churches are tax exempt. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. It can. And you know what? In the Middle Ages, it's gonna become a problem. But right now, it's a great relief to the church. And then the other thing, I said, what concerns him about the churches? Listen to this. He says, this page 364, sort of towards the top. I deem it a very serious matter that those in the provinces that divine providence has entrusted to my dedication, where there is a great number of people, the multitude should be found taking the wrong course in splitting up, as it were, and the bishops divided among themselves. He skips on to say, my respect for the lawful Catholic Church is so great that I want no schism or division of any kind anywhere. And then in the next letter, he says, I wish to cut short such dissensions. And he says, I have ordered a great many bishops from numerous places to assemble so that they can talk about it. This thing that people are divided about, this is the problem we talked about of what do we do with the people who gave up under persecution? They handed over scriptures to be burned. They gave the pinch of incense to Caesar. Do we let them back in the church? Does God forgive them? And there was a bishop in Africa named Donatus, and he said, heck no, he doesn't forgive them. These people blew it. They're out. And so these people came to be known as Donatists after Donatus. And they were splitting. And what he said is they're actually like, this church meets there, this church meets there. They don't meet with you. I don't meet with you because you're Donatists or you're not. You guys let the riffraff in. It's like you guys are hoity-toity, high and mighty, and you won't let sinners in. You know, and it was dividing. So Constantine said, look, we can't have, this is not what the church is to be. We got to work this out, okay? Keep in mind that he did that because we're going to talk about him doing it again here in a few minutes, okay? And I want to push into that other stuff. What does Eusebius think about Constantine? This is the easiest question ever. He is the president of the fan club, and he has all the merchandise. He loves Constantine. Oh, he does. He does. Yeah. So, so here's what we're going to work on for the next 2 weeks, writing-wise. Okay. In week 12 of your lovely reading guide is your outline for the encomium and the vituperation, aka invective. Apparently, it's on page 35. We did one of these back when we were reading about Marius and Sulla and Pompey and Caesar and Cicero and all those guys. So you already did one of these. And we are going to do one on Constantine. We're going to spend 2 weeks on it. So really, what you need to do this week is decide if you would like to praise him or blame him, and then start gathering information. Now, if I am you, I am now you, okay? Describe the stock a person comes from. Well, I don't know, Mrs. Ferguson. I don't remember. Where am I going to find that? Oh, like you would whine. Maybe if I were you, I would whine. Okay, maybe that's the difference. And I tell you, this is what an index is for. In the back of your book, there is an index of persons. And you look up Constantine, and you can find every page where Eusebius talks about Constantine. And you look them up, and you jot down on your little list, oh, he said this, he said this, he said this, right? You don't reread Eusebius. Please don't. Don't do that, all right? We're also going to be talking about some stuff today here in my storytelling, Mrs. Ferguson Story Hour, which is coming up, that you might want to jot down, all right, because I'm going to mention a few things. We, as far as I know, we don't know anything about his education, which is the second, category, describe and praise their education. What will I do about that? Well, I will use my imagination. Gee, let's think. His dad was the emperor of the West. Apparently he had power and money. If I had power and money and a kid, I'm probably going to get the best tutors for my kid. Constantine went on to run the Roman Empire for decades. Apparently he wasn't completely ignorant. You see? So you see what I'm doing? I'm going to have to use my imagination to fill in. A person in this place, in this time, in this position, would they have gotten a reasonably good education or not? You see? So it's okay to do that. It's okay. This is an exercise just to think of how many ideas can you think up? It's an invention exercise, is what it is. It's an invention practice. So look up all the places where Constantine has been mentioned. You ought to have a lot of deeds. He took out Maxentius at the Milvian Bridge and gave freedom to Christians. And I'm sounding like maybe we should praise him, but you might want to blame him. Does that make sense to everybody? And you did this before. So this week, you don't have to write the paper. Just collect. If you had points on his family, upbringing, deeds. Remember, it can be deeds of excellencies of the mind, excellencies of the body, excellencies of fortune. Take a look on week 12 and look over that again and see how many things you can think of to say about Constantine, okay? Then next week when we get together, I will give you information about writing the paper. Like we'll put our elocution elements, our figures of speech in, because we're going to add a new one. Does that instruction, is that good for everybody? Okay. Well, what I'd like to do is I'm now turning the page in the reading guide to week 26 on page 83, and I'm going to read this to you. This is an excerpt from Eusebius's Life of Constantine. And so Constantine saw this vision, believed the Christian God was the true God, but he was in a hard position, he was the emperor of everyone. He's favoring Christianity as much as he can, he's giving them, as we talked about, tax-exempt status and giving them buildings and giving them money and giving perks to the church. But he's not going to turn around and persecute the pagans now. Do you know what I mean? It's freedom of religion really meant freedom of religion.
But he's supporting those but the problem is, if you're an emperor, you probably don't want to show favoritism to anyone. But then again, you are the emperor, and you can do whatever you want unless it's a democracy.
And there's no sign that the pagans were upset about the favoritism.
They were just probably irritated.
Well, probably a little irritated. On the flip side, and so I don't usually tell you take notes. You don't have to take notes, but I'm going to be saying some things that might come in handy in your paper. So just keep that in mind. If I say something you think, oh, I could use that. Constantine did not immediately join the church. He delayed his baptism until he was almost ready to die. This sounds kind of bad, but many people did this back then. Even parents would delay baptism for their children because there was a kind of a mistaken idea that if you were baptized and you sinned again, that put you in greater jeopardy. And so people would wait. And so that's not, people say, see, Constantine wasn't really a Christian. Well, a lot of people did that. He did retain the title Pontifex Maximus, high priest of the Roman pagan religion, because he's the ruler of everybody. Do you know what I mean? It's ambiguous, the evidence. There are a lot of haters of Constantine who say, he was just a power grab and he used the Christians and he never really believed. But everything we can tell from what he wrote and his contemporaries wrote, he did believe it. It's just they had different customs then, and he, being the emperor, had responsibilities that he had to live up to for everyone. But evidently, he did not completely understand theology. He did not understand some issues that had arisen in the church, okay? And this, now story time begins. In Alexandria, there was a bishop named, interestingly, Alexander. And in his time, there was a priest serving in the church named Arius. I'm going to talk, but there's a paper in a minute. And Arius got to thinking about scripture and thinking about Jesus. And he just really found it a stumbling block to say, Jesus is God. What do we mean by Jesus is God? Do we mean God got crucified on a cross? Do we mean, was he really a man at all? What do we mean? That's confusing to me, says Arius. I like this. I think we'll go with this. Jesus is a created being. God created Jesus. He created Jesus before he created anything else. And then he used Jesus. Through Jesus, all that was made has been made, like it says in 1 John, or in John 1. And so he said, okay, I can wrap my mind around this. Jesus is a creature. He's a special creature, but he's a creature. And so, he's not really human, but he's not God. And so Arius got some buddies and they said, I like this. Okay, I don't know how to deal with saying this person was a man and God, and how does that work? I don't know. And so God died, but God can't, I don't like that. But creature, love it. And he got a following. And their catchphrase was this: there was a time when the word was not. There was a time when the word, Jesus, the word, didn't exist. So the Father wasn't always a father, because you can't be a father without a son, you know? Doesn't make any sense. So there was a time when God was God, and then he became God the Father. Yes, that is exactly the right face. And that is the face Alexander made. All right. And so, and so this started spreading. I don't know if that's exactly the face. It's probably pretty close. So this Arianism started spreading. And the Arians were pretty rabid about their beliefs, which I'll get back to in a minute. But Constantine heard that there was a big brouhaha in North Africa. And so he wrote a letter. And I'm going to read a portion of this letter. This is on page 83 in your guide. Constantine's letter to Alexander and Arius, the two sides of the controversy. Listen to what Constantine says. For as long as you continue to contend about these small and very insignificant questions, it is not fitting that so large a portion of God's people should be under the direction of your judgment, since you are thus divided between yourselves. I believe it indeed to be not merely unbecoming, but positively evil that such should be the case. But I will refresh your minds by a little illustration as follows. You know that philosophers, though they all adhere to one system, are yet frequently at issue on certain points, and differ perhaps in their degree of knowledge. Yet they are all recalled to harmony of sentiment by the uniting power of their common doctrines. If this be true, is it not far more reasonable that you, who are the ministers of the supreme God, should be of one mind respecting the profession of the same religion? But let us still more thoughtfully and with closer attention examine what I have said, and see whether it be right that, on the ground of some trifling and foolish verbal difference between ourselves, brothers should assume towards each other the attitude of enemies, and the august meeting of the synod be rent by profane disunion because of you who wrangle together on points so trivial and altogether unessential. This is vulgar, and rather characteristic of childish ignorance than consistent with the wisdom of priests and men of sense. Constantine did not understand, did he, that what was at stake here is the divinity of Christ. Yes.
Yeah, that's very. I'm gonna cut him some slack because he's kind of like a newer Christian. So he's very weak in his faith to not realize that you're fighting against heretical nonsense, saying that Jesus is a great being, like in this weird plane. That's kind of problematic.
It is.
Very
yes. So, you see, obviously he didn't understand, but he decided we need to do something about it. So he called a church council. This is how business got done. A synod, S-Y-N-O-D, that I read, is a smaller local meeting, but a council is church-wide. And so, for example, the first council is in the book of Acts, the Council of Jerusalem. James, head of the church at Jerusalem, calls the apostles and they say, what do we do with Gentiles who want to be Christians? Do we make them get circumcised? Do we make them follow the law? What do we do? Right. This is the next big one. This was the Council of Nicaea. All right, you don't have to write this down, but sometimes if you see things written, Nicaea is a town. Oh, and by the way, another thing Constantine did was adopt the little Greek colony of Byzantium on the place where the Mediterranean feeds into the Black Sea, and he turned it into Constantinople. It wasn't full of pagan temples like Rome. He's like, I'm going to have a Christian capital. I like Constantinople. I like it because it's named after me. And so we call the empire the Byzantine Empire from Byzantium, but we call the city Constantinople, except we don't anymore because we call it Istanbul today. which apparently is, if you say Constantinople, it starts to sound like Istanbul. That apparently the Turks thought it sounded like Istanbul when they said Constantinople, and they called it Istanbul. So just right across the straits from Constantinople was the town of Nicaea. 318 bishops all travel. Sometimes they travel for months, I mean, one guy came from Spain, Hosius from Cordova. The Bishop of Rome was too elderly to come, but he sent representatives on his behalf. Guys from Africa came, they came all over. These guys showed up. Some of them are missing eyes and limbs. Persecution. And it must have been quite a gathering. They all got to, Constantine presided. He said, I am not a bishop of the church, but I am the keeper of the peace for all the people, and I want to be in on this, okay. But there's no evidence that he drove doctrine or anything. He was just sort of a mediator and listener in, okay. And so the Arians get up and they say their piece. And the anti-Arians get up and they say their piece. And they start talking about it. And very rapidly come to the decision, Arius is so wrong. That is not the Jesus that we worship. That he is not a creature. And we need to put together a statement. A statement, this is what the church believes. Lay it down. So no one will be mistaken about what we believe and fall for these guys. So they put together what today we call the Nicene Creed, okay? Actually, I didn't grow up in a church that said this every week, but the vast majority of Christians around the world say this every week. It's okay. I'm not dissing your church if you don't, but the majority of Christians around the world every week say, it's always when you try to recite in front of people, I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. That's really all they say about God the Father. And in one Lord Jesus Christ, his Son, the only begotten, begotten of the Father before all worlds, light from light, very God of very God, begotten not made, of one essence with the Father, by whom all things were made, who for us men and for our salvation came down from heaven and was incarnate of the Holy Spirit and the Virgin Mary and became man. He was crucified also under Pontius Pilate, suffered and was buried. On the third day he rose again according to the Scriptures. He ascended into heaven and sitteth at the right hand of God the Father, and he will come again with glory to judge the living and the dead. That whole thing is the Jesus part. You see how short the God the Father part is? And then the huge, who is Jesus? And then I believe the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the forgiveness of sins. Oh, I've botched it. It's communion of saints, thank you. And life everlasting, okay. We've got most of them in there, okay. The point was the middle part. The point was the middle part. And, the second half was crucified under Pontius Pilate. And he was really a man. This happened in history. They really killed him. He really died. He really came back alive. But the first part, this is the heart of the Council of Nicaea. Begotten, not made, of one essence with the Father, by whom all things were made. You see, light of light. Very God of very God. I'm scrambling it up now. They wanted to leave no crack where Jesus wasn't God. And they used a word. I'm going to write the word, but you go ahead and say.
It's really, really hard to grasp the concept of Jesus being begotten, but not created. So in a way, I understand them kind of manipulating it, but I also understand that you have to kind of you gotta see the Bible for what it is. You gotta with the mystery of God.
Yeah.
Because that's not for any of us to know the mystery of God. That's not for any of us to know yet. It's not for us. And we're to
Yeah.
the mystery of God.
Arius wanted to shrink the wonder of the incarnation to a certain extent to make it understandable. So the church fathers in Nicaea came up with this word, homoousios, the same essence, of one essence with the Father. In some places, they say consubstantial with the Father. It all means the same thing. It's homoousios. The ousia is your being, like your essence, okay? And homo means the same. So they're saying with this word, whatever it is that makes God God, whatever that essence of godness is, Jesus has it. Jesus has it too. Same essence. Now, the Arians like, oh, we don't like that word because it's not in the Bible. And like, but this is what the Bible teaches. This sums up what it says. I and the Father are one. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. They're like, we don't like that word, but if we're going to just use words like that, how about we use this word? Homoousios. We're just going to stick a little I. We like the little I in there. Homoousios means similar in essence. Like. Not the same, but similar. And the Father's like, no similar. Yeah, no similars. Same. And this event has been mocked by some later historians as the whole Christian world was wrangling over one iota. The person who said that also reveals that they have no clue what this battle was over. And when they left Nicaea, they had decided this is what the church believes. Homoousios, of one essence with the Father. Jesus is fully God. Now, there's going to be some more councils, and they're going to discuss more, well, what does that mean? How are the man parts and God parts related in Jesus? They're going to do some more searching on that. But this laid the foundation for what we would call Christology, the study of who is Christ. What does that mean that he's man and God? Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, because Arianism didn't stop. And this is part 2 of story time today. The Arians did not give up. I don't know if this is mine or not. Hang on. The Arians did not give up. It is not mine. And it kept spreading. As a matter of fact, it became a bit of a problem in the Middle Ages because many of the barbarians that invaded the Roman Empire became Arian. They converted to Arian Christianity. So this did not stop. And that takes us to Saint Athanasius. We're going to read his little book on the Incarnation. Let me tell you a little bit about him. Alexander the bishop died, and Athanasius was chosen to be the next bishop. He went to the Council of Nicaea. As a priest, he was just sort of like secretary, you know. He didn't do a lot of speaking, but he was present. And he's going to take the reins, yes.
Alex the bishop died, and then another Alex came up.
No, the Athanasius. Athanasius. Oh, awesome. Great. All right, you can read it in my the unbotched, where all eyes are looking at me and I can't recite even things I know. So Athanasius was from Alexandria. He'd grown up there. The story is that when he was a little boy, he was playing church, you know, like kids play church or school or whatever. And he was being the bishop. Like he was blessing people and doing baptisms and whatever. And Alexander, the bishop, saw, like, he's like, he's amazing. So he didn't really reprimand him. And he even legitimized the baptisms that Athanasius performed. He's like, they did this in good faith. They meant it. He meant it. And so he took Athanasius in and raised him. I have pictures of like little Samuel being raised in the temple or in the tabernacle. He raised him in the church. And so brought him up. And he was the most powerful force against the Arians in his lifetime. The motto, I'm not going to write it because it's too long. Athanasius contra mundum. Athanasius against the world. That's the motto associated with him, because sometimes it probably felt like he was the only person left saying Jesus is God. He was bishop for decades, but he spent 5 stints in exile. 5 times he was thrown out of his bishopric. Once they sent a guy named George, and George came in, and the Arians, I kid you not, sacked the churches, tortured and killed people who refused to Oh, yes. Well,
How false is your faith if you're killing other Christians?
I mean, it was really bad. And as a matter of fact, it just so happens, I told you I'm reading through like Church Fathers. I read this 38 volume set online. And anyway, I'm up to the Athanasius volume. It just so happens, weirdly, that we're reading this and I'm reading that volume. And right now I'm reading all the letters. He's writing letters to the Bishop of Rome saying, these guys are saying a bunch of crap about me. But it was. I feel like I can use strong language about this stuff. So here's the things they said about Athanasius. Athanasius, you know what he did? He sent a deacon, he sent to this church out here in the desert, and the deacon broke in under Athanasius' orders, and they broke the sacred chalice, and they spilled the wine, and he like roughed him up a little bit. We need to get rid of him. And then they go investigate, and the guy says, all right, well, no, it wasn't actually church service. Actually, it wasn't a Sunday, and I was in bed sick anyway. This never happened. They just spread lies. But that's not my favorite one. Here's my favorite one. Athanasius had this guy killed. I can't remember his name. It started with an A. He had this guy killed. And look, here's his hand. He was going to use his hand for some sort of unholy satanic rites. See? And Athanasius is like, oh my gosh. So he starts making inquiries, and he finds where they're hiding the guy that he supposedly killed. And he smuggles him out. And the poor guy didn't really know he was being used as a pawn. They just kind of paid him and said, stay here and don't go outside. Sure, he didn't know what was going on. They smuggle him in. So they're having a big church meeting. Oh, Athanasius is in big trouble. And so Athanasius, Perry Mason, it's illegal. Tell me, would you recognize this person if you saw them? Oh, yes, I would recognize him if I saw him. Bring in the first witness, So they bring him in, and he's all kind of cloaked, and they pull back the cloak. Would you like to tell us who this is? It's that guy. And then they pull up both his sleeves, and he has both his hands. They're like, would you like to tell us where he used to keep that third hand? Would you like to? Oh my gosh, this is a true story. So poor Athanasius, I'm reading, he's writing these letters to all over and saying, they keep spreading lies about me. I don't know what to do. At this point, Constantine had died, and he had 3 sons, Constantine, Constantius, and Constans. I don't even know what to say about that. And one of them died fairly rapidly, so it was the other 2. And they were kind of on the fence. They kind of were pro-Arian a little bit. And sometimes they also said, okay, Athanasius, beat it. And bring in a new bishop. And then it would cause a riot. Alexandria was very volatile. They were very speculative in their theologies. The Origen was from, the guy who ended up being a heretic. And they got kind of wild in the streets of Alexandria. And the emperor didn't like it. And it all seemed to be the fault, in his opinion, of those non-Arian Christians, So Athanasius, over and over, against the world, keeps being sent. I think the longest time he was ever bishop there was 9 years. Over 50 years. And then they kept banishing him again and again and again. Okay, before I go to the book, I brought this paper, okay, because I think this is hilarious. Do I have time? Yeah. Okay, this is from a church history book that takes up where Eusebius left off. There are 3 other histories that do like the next 100 years or so after Constantine. Each party was anxious to commit, each party being the Arians and the non-Arians, was anxious to commit the government of the church to a bishop of its own persuasion. For interminable disputes concerning doctrine were rampant among them, and they could not agree as to the mode of singing psalms. And as had been stated, psalms were sung by each individual in conformity with his own peculiar creed. Like they changed the words to the psalms to match what they... Yeah. Such being the state of the church in Antioch, the partisans of Eudoxius thought it would be well to entrust the bishopric of the city to Meletius, then bishop of Sebaste, he being possessed of great and persuasive eloquence, excellent life, and they all imagined being of like opinions with themselves. We thought he was an Arian. Wrong. They believed that his reputation would attract the inhabitants of Antioch and of the neighboring cities to conform to their heresy. But their expectations were utterly frustrated. It is said that on his first arrival in Antioch, an immense multitude, composed of Arians and of those who were in communion with Paulinus, flocked around him. Some wished to see the man because his fame was great, even before his coming. Others were anxious to hear what he had to say and to ascertain the nature of his opinions. For a report had been spread abroad, which was afterwards proved to be true, that he maintained the doctrines of those convened at Nicaea. In his first discourses, he confined himself to instructing the people in what we call ethics. Afterwards, however, he openly declared that the Son is of the same substance as the Father. Okay, this is the funny part. It is said that at these words, the archdeacon of the church, who was then one of the clergy there, stretched out his hand and covered the mouth of the preacher. Like jumps from. But that he continued to explain his sentiments more clearly by means of his fingers than he could in language. He extended 3 fingers only towards the people, closed them, and then allowed only 1 finger to remain. 3 in 1. And then allowed only 1 finger to remain, and thus expressed by signs what he was prevented from uttering. As the archdeacon, in his embarrassment, seized his hand, he released the mouse. Then the tongue was free, and Meletius declared his opinion still more clearly and with a loud voice, and exhorted his auditors to adhere to the tenets of the Council of Nicaea. This is hilarious. I can just see this poor guy. Like, I don't know what is he doing with his other hand? That's what I want to know. What are you not grabbing him with both hands?
I can't stop him. He has both the hand and the mouth.
Athanasius wrote a lot, but when he was young, he wrote a couple of books, the most famous of which is called On the Incarnation or Concerning the Incarnation. This is his examination of, well, why did Jesus become a man? Why? Now, I do not want you to be scared at the length of this, and I don't think your book looks like mine, because I found it last summer. This one got expensive on Amazon, and then I flipped it. Okay. Okay, so here I have some specific instructions for you about this book, okay? First of all, if your book has these in it, I kind of hoped that you would get one with an introduction by C.S. Lewis. Please, I don't usually ask you to read the introductions. I think it's 7 pages long, and C.S. Lewis is always very easily read. I would really like it if you would read the introduction by C.S. Lewis. This time, only this time, do I say, please, the introduction. And then the rest of this book, in mine, there's a life of Athanasius. You don't have to read that, all right, unless you want to. In mine, the actual book doesn't start till page 25, and it only goes to here. This is another letter. So if it's not the incarnation of the Word of God, if it's not obviously the treatise on the incarnation, you don't have to read that except for that C.S. Lewis intro, which is really great. I'm having you read the whole thing. It's about, in this little book, the pages aren't, it's about 70 pages. And there's big gaps, spaces in between. It's really, I almost think you could take a whole afternoon and just like 3 hours, and you could just sit down and read the whole thing. I don't think it's that bad. There are a couple of sections towards the back. He has a refutation of the Jews and refutation of the Gentiles. And the Jews one is kind of long. So if you get pressed for time or it just bogs you down, you could skip those refutation parts if you needed to. They're expendable. But I think I asked you questions about every chapter, and we will go over that. But this is that same Athanasius, but he did not know what the future held in store for him, that he was going to be the one voice of truth against a world that felt like it was going crazy and falling down around him, and these Arians who were just violent.
It sounds like this time, but in ancient times.
You know what? Things don't change very much. Things don't change.
Is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun.
This is true.
People don't read history.
So we have a few minutes left. So is that clear? We're going to read On the Incarnation and hopefully the C.S. Lewis intro. And what you're going to do is hopefully go back and just jot down ideas of, do you think Constantine's a good guy or a bad guy? And then what can you glean out of Eusebius? You could probably spend half an hour just going through the index and then think about that letter that he wrote to Alexander and Arius. He obviously doesn't understand theology, but do we expect him to understand theology? You know, we could defend him for that. And then if you're having problems getting ideas, we'll discuss that next week, and then the next week we'll write it. But if you've got your ideas kind of set down, it'll be easy to write. So after, I'll just ramble for another 4 minutes. After Constantine's sons eventually all died, Constantine had a nephew named Julian. Julian had gone to school in Athens with actually some of the most noted Christian fathers. I think Basil the Great and Gregory, they'd been students at the same time. And Julian grew up in his uncle Constantine's household, and he knew which way the wind was blowing, as they say. And he was a very good Christian boy and did his stuff. But on the side, he sought out pagan philosophers and pagan teachers, and he got really into paganism. When his cousins died, he was made emperor. And Julian is now known to history as Julian the Apostate. Apostate means you've fallen away from the faith. He tried to full-scale reinstitute paganism. We're opening all the temples. Yeah. I mean, they were never completely closed because it was freedom of religion, but people weren't flocking to them. He started cracking down on the Christians, but he learned from his predecessors. You know, when we just kill them, it doesn't do any good because people see it and they say, that's awesome, I'm going to be a Christian too. The killing didn't work. But he took a page out of the Maximin playbook. What you do with kids has an effect. And Julian says, well, here's a new rule. No Christians may be teachers of literature in the schools. Because literature then was the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Aeneid, you know, and we don't want Christians putting any sort of Christian spin on anything they teach. So, and because literature was basically school, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, those were the subjects, and basically the sciences, that would be university level. Skill with words, that's what you learned in school. And so, and what we're doing here today would have been part of it. Reading literature and talking about it. Reading literature and thinking about it. We don't want Christians doing that because they will taint their students. That's what Julian did. Banished Christians all over the place lost their jobs. Christian professors of grammar or logic or rhetoric lost their jobs. He was very smart. However, he ended up at war again in the East with the Parthians, you know, that never give up, and was killed there. And there are two versions of his death. I will leave you with this. Version number one by his friends says that he was wounded and they took him out of the battle and he conversed about philosophy as he slowly faded away, all right? Version number two, admittedly written by the Christians, says he grabbed a handful of blood off himself and flung it at the sky and said, "Thou hast conquered, O Galilean," and just did this to God as he was dying. That's the one that's gone down in history that we don't know if either one of them is completely accurate, all right? But that's what Julian is known for basically just going like this to God as he was dying, which isn't a good idea, ever. Don't ever do it, but when you're dying, really don't do it. And Julian was the last hurrah of persecution, of restrictions on Christianity, and after that, in fact, within 40 years after Julian, a Theodosius is going to be emperor, and he's going to say, not only is Christianity legal on a footing with all other religions, it is the official religion of the empire. Constantine didn't do that. Theodosius did that, but he's like, this is our official religion. You should be a Christian. This is our religion.
After studying persecution for so long, it just feels like
It does. Okay, you may go. Oh, and they're waiting. They're waiting right now for the pictures. Okay, gather anybody who else is like rhetoric level.